Imagine waking up one day to the shocking truth that the person you've spent years building a life with has been lying to you the entire time. That's exactly what happened to me when I discovered my husband's double life. Two families, two different identities, and a web of lies that shattered everything I thought I knew about love and trust. I never thought I'd be telling this story. I never thought I'd be the one on the other side of a betrayal like this. But here I am, sharing the painful truth of how my perfect marriage was a lie, and how I had to rebuild my life from the ground up after the shocking revelation of my husband's deceit. I know many of you have been through similar heartbreak, and I'm here to tell you, you're not alone. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of finding strength when everything seems lost, of uncovering the painful truth, and of learning to trust again. So, stay with me, because what I'm about to share might just change the way you look at relationships and trust forever. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to hear your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. Let's talk about how we can all grow stronger after life shatters our world. You know those moments in life where everything just feels right? Like you finally found your place, your person, and your purpose? That was me. I had it all, or at least I thought I did. My husband, the love of my life, was everything I had dreamed of. He was kind, caring, attentive, always there when I needed him. We had our routines. Dinner together every night. Weekends spent cuddled on the couch, and conversations that lasted for hours about everything and nothing. He made me feel like the luckiest woman in the world. We were that couple that everyone looked at with envy, thinking we had it all together. And honestly, I believed it too. I trusted him. I believed in us. We were a family. 2 kids. A house that we turned into a home, and a life that seemed perfect in every way. Every glance he gave me was filled with affection. Every touch was tender, and every promise he made seemed unbreakable. I truly thought we were building something unshakable. I didn't even consider the possibility of betrayal because, why would I? Our life was filled with so much love and trust. I was certain that this was forever. How could I not be? We were a team. We were in this together for the long haul. But as time passed, something began to feel off. I didn't realize it at first, but there were little things that didn't quite match up. Little cracks in what seemed like a perfectly smooth surface. And it wasn't just about his behavior. It was about how I was feeling. More distant, more unsure. It was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it yet. I wanted to believe everything was fine. Who doesn't want to hold on to the idea of a perfect life, right? But sometimes the perfect life isn't. Something wasn't adding up, but I was determined not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was just me. Maybe I was imagining things. But then again, how do you ignore those moments when the pieces just don't fit? And so, the picture-perfect marriage I had once believed in started to crack, little by little. And that's when I began asking myself, what was really going on behind those smiles, those promises, that perfect life? What if it wasn't as perfect as I thought? But then again, when you love someone so deeply, you cling to that hope, don't you? You want to believe the best in them, to trust that they're being honest with you. Maybe I was just overthinking it. Or maybe not. This is where things started to get complicated, and I had no idea how much my life was about to change. As much as I hate to admit it, there were signs. They weren't huge red flags, but they were there. At first, I convinced myself that I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. It was those little moments, those subtle changes in his behavior, that I couldn't ignore any longer. Take, for example, the sudden, unexplained absences. He'd be gone longer than usual for work, but when I asked him about it, his answers didn't seem as certain. His tone had changed, his excuses less believable. He'd always been a workaholic, but this was different. It wasn't just the time spent away. It was the way he acted when he came back, distant, distracted, almost as if his mind was somewhere else. I remember one evening, I asked him how his day went, and he responded with such a detached tone. It was like he was talking to a stranger. He wasn't the man I'd married. He wasn't the person who would share everything with me, who would laugh about the smallest things. And then there were the phone calls. When he was home, his phone was suddenly always on silent. He would take calls in another room, as if he was trying to hide something. There was nothing outwardly suspicious, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He'd brush it off with a laugh, saying it was just work stuff. But even I knew that wasn't it. I began to wonder, was I just overreacting? Maybe I was just tired, stressed. Perhaps I was creating issues where there were none. But then again, trust doesn't come from nowhere. It's built over years, and once that foundation starts cracking, you can't just ignore it. I found myself second-guessing everything. Should I trust my gut, or was I being paranoid? The little voice in my head kept saying, "You're imagining things." But the other voice, the one that had been growing louder with every passing day, whispered, "Something is wrong. You need to find out." The mental tug-of-war between self-doubt and suspicion started to take its toll. Was I really just overthinking everything? Or was there something deeper beneath the surface? Then one day, the tension reached its peak. I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. It was for a hotel in another city. On a weekend, he had told me he was out of town for business. My heart sank. I didn't know what to do with this discovery. Should I confront him? Should I wait for more proof? In that moment, I felt completely lost. I wanted to pretend everything was fine. I wanted to go back to the days when life felt normal, when I believed in the life we had built. But now, I wasn't so sure anymore. Was I really seeing things clearly? Or was this the beginning of uncovering something I wasn't ready to face? And the worst part, the emotional turmoil that came with it. It was like I was living in two worlds. One where everything seemed perfect, and the other where doubt and suspicion were slowly eroding my peace of mind. I didn't know who to trust anymore. Not just him, but myself. Could I even trust my own instincts? I was standing at the edge of something bigger, and I had no idea how far it would all fall. This, I realized, was the point of no return. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. But what would happen if I did start confronting the truth? What if I was wrong? And what if it was worse than I ever imagined? It was a moment I'll never forget. The kind that etches itself into your memory forever, like a scar that never fades. You think you know someone, that you understand the person you've shared your life with, and then in an instant, everything is turned upside down. That's exactly how it happened. I had no warning, no idea that the man I thought I knew, my husband, the love of my life, was living a double life, one that had been hidden from me for so long. It wasn't some grand, dramatic confrontation. No, it was something far worse. It was a discovery made by accident, a fluke, but that didn't make it any less devastating. It all started with a simple thing, his phone. I know, it sounds cliché, but there it was. He'd left it on the kitchen counter while he went out for a jog one Sunday morning. His phone. It had always been close to him, almost attached to his hand. So why was it just lying there, as if it didn't matter? As if he wasn't concerned about who might see it, who might look at it. I don't know what came over me, whether it was intuition or pure curiosity, but I picked it up. Maybe it was the nagging feeling that had been growing in the back of my mind for weeks now. The one that told me there were things he wasn't telling me. I unlocked it, without even thinking. I don't know what I was hoping to find, but at that moment, I felt like I had to know. Maybe I wanted to prove myself wrong. Maybe I was searching for some kind of reassurance that everything was okay. I didn't know. But what I found, well, it shattered everything. The first thing that hit me was the message thread. It wasn't the usual work emails or group chats or silly memes. It was a conversation with a woman, a name I didn't recognize, someone who was not me. The messages were intimate, flirty, affectionate, and they were recent. My heart sank as I read through them, each word digging deeper into the pit that was forming in my stomach. There were plans for weekends together, inside jokes, and sweet promises that were supposed to be mine. This woman, whoever she was someone he was emotionally involved with. It wasn't just a fling, it was an affair. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what came next. I scrolled through the messages, looking for answers, when I saw an address, a home address. Not his. It wasn't even close to our neighborhood. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the nearest piece of paper and jotted down the address, unsure what I would do with it, but knowing deep down that I had to know. I had to go there. I had to understand what was happening. I tried to convince myself that this was some kind of misunderstanding, that maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe there was an explanation, a reason for these texts, for this betrayal. I tried to reason with myself, but the truth was clear. I was being lied to. I was being deceived. And what made it worse was that I didn't just have one lie to unravel, I had two. The woman in the messages wasn't the only one. As I did more digging, I discovered more connections, more lies. He had been living a double life, with two families, two separate worlds, one that he had carefully constructed with me, and another one that was just as real, just as deep, and just as heartbreaking. It was as if I had been living in a shadow, a facade of a marriage that was nothing more than a cover-up for his secrets. I was torn between wanting to know everything and wishing I could forget it all. My hands trembled as I dialed the number for the address I had written down, my heart pounding in my chest, each beat feeling like it was echoing across my entire being. The phone rang, and I wanted to scream, to hang up, but I couldn't. I had to know. The phone picked up on the other end, and I couldn't even hear my own voice as I asked for the person who lived there. That's when I heard it. The voice on the other end was a woman's, but it wasn't just any woman's voice. It was the voice of his wife. The truth was finally out. The man I had been married to, the man I had trusted, had not one, but two families. And I was just a part of the lie. My heart dropped into my stomach as I sat there, frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. How had I been so blind? How could I have missed all the signs? It was as if everything I thought I knew, everything we had built together, crumbled in that one moment. My mind raced, unable to process what I had just learned. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw the phone against the wall. I wanted to confront him immediately, to demand answers. But I couldn't. I had to stay calm. I had to think this through. Because the truth was, I had no idea what was coming next. I had uncovered one layer of the lies. But what else was there? What other betrayals had I been blind to? And as I thought about all the years we had spent together, I couldn't help but ask myself, how could I have been so wrong about him? About us? The answers were out there, but they were far from easy to hear. And little did I know, this discovery was only the beginning. I never imagined I'd find myself in this position, standing on the doorstep of a complete stranger's life, looking into the face of someone who was, in a way, also my husband's wife. It felt surreal, like a scene ripped from some twisted drama that I would never have imagined in my worst nightmares. But this wasn't a movie. This was my life. And now, this other woman, standing in front of me, was part of the truth that had been hidden from me for far too long. She looked at me with confusion and hesitation, her eyes widening as she registered who I was. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaky but demanding. It took everything I had not to break down right there. This was it. The moment when all the pieces came together, The moment I finally had to face the woman who had been unknowingly living parallel to my life, to my marriage. I had to keep my composure, even though inside, my world was crumbling. I'm his wife, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, as if saying it aloud would make the reality of it all sink in even more painfully. Her face paled as she stepped back, opening the door wider, almost as if she had been expecting this. As if she knew, deep down, that something like this was inevitable. She motioned for me to come inside, her eyes darting around as if searching for something, anything, to say that would make sense of this nightmare we were both trapped in. I walked inside, and as I looked around the house, everything felt so normal, so typical. It was like looking at the life I had once imagined for myself, except now, it was someone else's reality. There were photos on the walls of him with her, happy, smiling, living the life I thought I was building with him. I wanted to scream, to ask how long it had been going on, how deep this deception ran. How had he managed to keep this other family, this other life, hidden from me? She sat me down and, for a brief moment, we exchanged a look of shared devastation. She, too, was caught in the lie. I couldn't help but feel sorry for her, despite the anger and betrayal that was boiling inside me. I wasn't the only one whose life had been torn apart. She had been living a lie just like me. I didn't know about you, she said, her voice tinged with bitterness and a quiet sadness. I didn't know there was another woman. He told me you were just a past. The word past hung in the air, heavy and cutting, as if she had been reduced to nothing more than a chapter he'd closed long ago. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but instead, I found myself frozen. What could I say? What could I ask? How do you even begin to process the fact that the man you had shared your life with, your love, your future, had somehow managed to build an entirely separate life with someone else? How had he lied to both of us all these years? The pain was almost unbearable. My heart was breaking, but somehow I was holding it together just enough to continue. But this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of uncovering the full scope of his deception. It was almost like a twisted puzzle, each new revelation fitting together in ways I couldn't have imagined. This wasn't just about a one-time affair or a short fling. This was about two families, two separate lives, built on a foundation of lies. My trust in him had been shattered, but now I was staring at the woman who had been living a parallel life to mine, and she had her own set of questions, ones that I was just beginning to ask myself. As I sat there in the living room, listening to her recount her version of events, I could feel my stomach tightening. The details were both familiar and foreign, like I was listening to the echoes of my own life, but through the lens of someone else's experience. He had told her the same stories. He had made her feel like she was the center of his world, just like he had done to me. He'd used the same excuses, the same empty promises. How could he have done this to both of us? How could he have carried this secret for so long? The deeper we delved into the truth, the more I realized just how much I had been deceived. It wasn't just his infidelity. It was the fact that he had woven an entirely separate life around this woman, building a home, a future, a family. The truth was more painful than I could have ever imagined. And the worst part, I wasn't the only one who had been fooled. The more we talked, the more I realized that this woman wasn't my enemy. She was just as much a victim as I was. We were both trapped in a web of lies, spun by a man who had no remorse, no conscience about the lives he had shattered. He had been playing both of us, making promises to both of us, leading us both to believe we were the one and only. It was a betrayal that went beyond cheating. It was a betrayal of everything we had ever known, everything we had ever trusted. But even in the midst of this betrayal, one thing became clear. This was no longer just about him anymore. It was about the two of us. about rebuilding the lives that had been shattered by his lies. We could no longer afford to be passive in this story. We had to take control. We had to move forward, even if it meant walking away from the past he had destroyed. As I left her home that day, my mind was swirling with a mix of emotions: anger, pain, confusion. But beneath it all, something else began to stir, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Strength. The strength to face the truth. The strength to take back what had been stolen from me. And most importantly, the strength to rebuild my life, piece by painful piece. But how would I do it? And what would come next? The truth had been laid bare, and now everything was crashing down around me. The consequences of his double life were impossible to ignore. The family I thought I knew, our family, had just been shattered into a million pieces. But it wasn't just about me anymore. The fallout wasn't confined to my heart alone. It rippled outward, touching everyone involved, and the chaos that followed was something I never could have prepared for. The first call I made was to my mother. I knew I needed someone to lean on, someone who would understand, even though I could already hear the judgment in her voice. She had always told me to trust my instincts, to trust my gut when something felt off. And yet, here I was, standing in the wreckage of my life, wondering how I could have been so blind. As soon as I told her, she didn't respond right away. I could feel her disbelief across the phone line. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with shock, but also a tinge of sympathy. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," she said softly. "This is a nightmare, I know. But remember, you have a family who loves you, and you're not alone in this." She was right. I wasn't alone. But knowing that didn't ease the emotional chaos I was living through. I hung up the phone, still in shock. I needed more than just words. I needed answers. I needed to understand how my husband had come to think he could live this double life without consequences. I called his family next. The words came out in a jumble. I told them everything. I could hear their confusion, their disbelief, their anger growing with each sentence. There was no comfort in their voices, no understanding. All they could do was question. 2. How long has this been going on? What else don't we know? They wanted answers as much as I did, but I didn't have them. And then came the confrontation. His other family, the wife, the woman I had never known about, was now just as involved in this drama. She was just as much in the middle of the storm as I was. Her anger, her heartbreak mirrored mine. But what could we do? Could we ever forgive him? Would we ever be able to see him the same way again? And how could we rebuild what was left of our lives after such a betrayal? She and I spoke once more after that shocking encounter at her house. She called me. There was no apology, no understanding in her voice, just pain. "I never knew about you," she repeated over and over, as if she was trying to convince herself. "I never knew he had another family." And I could tell she was struggling with this truth, just like I had been. The emotional weight was too much for either of us to bear. Her words cut deeper than I expected. I was angry with her at first, thinking maybe she'd been part of the deception. But she wasn't. She was as much a victim in this story as I was. It was easy to blame her, to resent her, but in that moment, I realized that he was the one who had to be held accountable, not her. We were both left holding the broken pieces of a marriage that had never truly existed in the first place. My phone rang the next day. It was him. His number flashed on the screen, and for a moment I thought about ignoring it, pretending I didn't see it. But I couldn't. I had to hear what he would say. I had to know how he would explain all of this. How could someone who had promised me the world, someone I trusted with everything I had, betray me so thoroughly? How could he look me in the eye, day after day, and lie? When I answered, His voice was calm. Too calm. "We need to talk," he said, like nothing had changed, like nothing was wrong. He sounded so composed, as if his world hadn't just crumbled, as if he hadn't destroyed mine in the process. But I wasn't ready for his explanations. I wasn't ready to hear his excuses. His calm tone only made me angrier. I could feel the rage building inside of me, but I forced myself to stay calm. What good would it do to yell? What good would it do to cry in front of him? The emotional fallout was already too much to bear. I needed to take control of the situation, and I needed to do it now. No more lies. No more pretending. When we finally met, he tried to apologize, but the words were meaningless. How could he apologize for years of deception, for creating a second family, while still living with me as if everything was normal? The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. He apologized over and over, but each apology felt hollow, empty, as if he knew that nothing could fix what had been broken. Nothing could bring back the trust that had been so brutally stolen from us both. But what about the kids? What about our children? How would they ever trust again? How could I explain to them what had happened? The fallout was more than just between the two of us. It was something that was going to impact everyone. My heart broke for our children, knowing that their lives would never be the same. How could I protect them from the pain of this betrayal? Could we ever move on from the devastation he'd caused? And what about the family I had once trusted, the one he had claimed was so important to him? Their reactions, just like his, were mixed. Some were supportive, offering their sympathy and concern. Others seemed distant, unsure of what to say. His mother, who had always treated me like a daughter, was silent for a long time. She was a victim of his lies, too. But nothing could undo the damage that had been done to me, to our family. The web of lies was too vast, too complicated. Every phone call, every conversation just led to more pain, more questions. It was the beginning of a long and painful process. Rebuilding after the chaos, after the destruction of everything we had built together, was going to take more than time. It was going to take strength. It was going to take resilience. But most importantly, it was going to take a complete rethinking of what family, trust, and love meant. What would come next? Could we ever rebuild from the wreckage? Would we ever trust again? After everything collapsed, I found myself in a whirlwind of emotions. I was lost, numb, trying to make sense of everything. The life I had built, the future I had envisioned, all felt like it was slipping away from me, piece by piece. It wasn't just a betrayal that hurt. It was a realization that so much of what I had believed in was built on lies. The heartbreak was suffocating, and I couldn't breathe. I had to sit with that pain, even when every fiber of my being screamed to run away from it. I spent countless nights awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I could have missed the signs. How could I have been so blind? It wasn't just about the affair or the double life he was leading. It was about everything. The little moments I thought meant something, the promises he made, the times he looked me in the eye and told me everything was fine. Every memory became tainted by the knowledge that none of it was real. He had been living a lie, and I had been living in it, thinking everything was okay. How did I not see it? But here's the thing. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't the only one who had been deceived. I wasn't the only one who had trusted him. He had lied to everyone. Not just me, but his other family, his friends, his colleagues. He had created a web of lies so complex that even he had started to believe it. I realized that this betrayal wasn't just about me. It was a reflection of who he had become. And in that moment, I knew I had to stop blaming myself for something I couldn't have controlled. The hardest part of this journey was the self-doubt. I questioned everything about myself. Was I not good enough? Was I not paying enough attention? Did I miss the signs because I wanted to believe in the man I married? I started to wonder if I was just too trusting, if I had let my guard down for too long. And the worst part, I started to wonder if I had any value left in myself after everything I had just gone through. But the one thing that started to sink in, slowly, painfully, was that this betrayal wasn't a reflection of me. It wasn't about my worth or my inability to see the truth. It was about him. It was about the lies he had told, the choices he made, and the person he had become. And slowly, I began to realize that I was more than the woman who had been betrayed. I was stronger than I thought. Every tear I cried, every sleepless night, every moment of feeling like I wasn't enough, it was all part of the healing process. It wasn't easy, and it certainly didn't feel good at the time, but each step brought me closer to the person I wanted to become. The pain wasn't permanent, though it felt like it would be in those early days. But the more I reflected on the situation, the more I realized that healing came from within. I couldn't rely on anyone else to fix this for me. I had to find my own strength, my own resilience, and I had to do it on my own terms. I started questioning everything. What did I want out of life? What did I want for my children? For myself? It wasn't just about fixing a broken marriage anymore. It was about rebuilding myself, finding my own voice again, and rediscovering who I was before all of this. The heartbreak had forced me into the space of deep reflection, but in that process, I began to understand my own power. I didn't need to be defined by his lies or the pain he caused me. I could create a new chapter for myself, one that was full of possibility, not destruction. There were moments when I doubted my ability to get through it, moments when I wanted to give up and walk away from everything, especially when the pain felt too overwhelming. But then I'd remember the woman I used to be, the strong, determined person I had been before all of this. I reminded myself that I hadn't come this far just to quit now. I had faced hard times before, and I could face this one too. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about taking those lessons, learning from them, and using them to move forward. The hardest part of the heartbreak was the feeling of being broken. But as I reflected more on it, I realized that it was this very heartbreak that would be the catalyst for change. The emotional recovery didn't happen overnight, and it certainly wasn't linear. Some days felt like progress, while others felt like 2 steps back. But I had to keep moving forward, piece by piece, day by day. And then there were the quiet moments, those moments where I would catch myself smiling again, even though it felt unnatural at first. It felt like an eternity before I could feel joy again, but when it came, it was a sign that I was starting to heal. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about reclaiming my life. I wasn't just a victim of betrayal. I was a woman finding her strength, rediscovering her worth, and learning to live again. The truth was painful, and the lies he had told were destructive. But through all of it, I learned that I could still find a way to move forward. And slowly, that became my focus, finding a way forward one step at a time. Because, in the end, the only person I could control was me. And the only way to heal was by accepting what happened, learning from it, and starting to rebuild my life stronger than before. The day came when I had to confront him. There was no avoiding it anymore. After all the lies, all the deception, the time had finally arrived. I had so many questions burning inside me, so much anger, so much betrayal, that it felt like my chest might explode. I couldn't keep running from this conversation. It was the one thing that had to happen, and as much as I hated it, I knew it was the only way to find any sense of closure. When he walked through the door, my heart skipped a beat. There he was, standing in front of me, the man I had loved, the father of my children, the one who had promised to always be honest with me. But now, looking at him, I could barely recognize the person he had become. His eyes, once filled with warmth and love, were now clouded with guilt, fear, and maybe even shame. But no amount of shame could undo the damage he had caused. "Sit down," I told him. my voice shaking with emotion. I had prepared for this moment, rehearsed every word I was going to say, but now that it was here, I couldn't find the right words. He sat down across from me, looking at me cautiously, as though he knew that the truth he had been running from was about to catch up with him. "You've been living a double life, haven't you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I needed to hear him admit it. I needed him to say it out loud, so I could finally stop doubting myself, stop wondering if I had somehow imagined all the lies. His eyes shifted uneasily, and for a moment I thought he might try to deny it. But then he nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, his voice low. "I never wanted you to find out like this." I couldn't hold back the tears. I had spent so much time thinking about this moment, and now that it was here, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a painful defeat. The man I had married, the man I thought I could trust, had betrayed me in ways I never thought possible. "Why?" I whispered, the word hanging in the air between us. "Why did you do this? What was it that made you think you could live this way? With 2 families, 2 wives, and all those lies? How could you look at me, at our children, and do this?" He looked away, guilt written all over his face. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I recognized from years ago, but it didn't comfort me now. His excuses were weak, his words rehearsed. "I never meant for it to get this far," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "It was a mistake, and I thought I could handle it. I thought I could keep you both happy without anyone finding out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He thought he could handle it. He thought he could juggle 2 families and keep everything under control. I had given him everything, my heart, my trust, my love, and he had tossed it all aside without a second thought. How could he think that was even possible? "This isn't just a mistake," I said, my voice rising. "This is a betrayal. This is deception. This is destroying everything we built together. You've lied to me for years. How can I ever believe you again? How can I trust you, knowing that you've been living a lie?" He looked at me, pain in his eyes. I could see that he was sorry, but it wasn't enough. His apology didn't fix the years of lies, the moments of love that had been nothing but a facade. Nothing he said could take away the hurt. "I was selfish," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I never thought about how this would affect you, or the kids, or her. I never thought it would end up like this." The truth hung heavy in the room. I had waited for so long to hear it, but now that I had, it didn't bring me peace. There was no peace in his words, no comfort in his apologies. All I could feel was the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me, and I couldn't help but wonder how much of it had been planned. How long had he been living this lie? Had it been years, or was it something that had just started? And then I asked the one question that had been haunting me the most. "Do you love her?" It wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about the marriage. I needed to know if he had loved her the way he had once loved me. He hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. I don't know. I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted it to get this far." His answer didn't help. It didn't provide me with the clarity I needed. If anything, it just added another layer of confusion. How could he not know? How could he have been torn between 2 families, 2 lives, without ever truly understanding what he was doing to the people who loved him? The conversation stretched on, with more apologies, more half-answers, more excuses. But none of it mattered. The damage had been done, and no amount of words could fix it. The emotional toll was too great, the trust shattered beyond repair. I knew, in that moment, that this was it. I couldn't continue in this marriage. Not after everything he had done. The foundation of trust was gone. And once that trust is shattered, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. I stood up, feeling my legs tremble beneath me, and said the words that had been building up inside me for so long. "I can't do this anymore." He didn't say anything at first. His silence spoke volumes. But it didn't matter anymore. There was nothing left for us to say. I had made my decision. The pain was still raw, but it was clear that moving on was the only choice left. And so, we sat in silence for a long time, both of us processing what had just happened. The conversation was over, but the damage had already been done. The lies were too deep, and the betrayal too vast to ever repair. When everything fell apart, I honestly didn't know where to begin. It felt like the world had caved in on me, and I was left standing in the rubble of my own life. The emotional chaos was overwhelming. There were days when I didn't even want to get out of bed, when the thought of facing another day felt like too much. But as painful as it was, something inside me began to stir. I realized that I had to pick up the pieces, not just for myself, but for my children, for the person I used to be, and for the future I wanted to build. Rebuilding wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. In fact, it felt like it took forever. There were days when I thought I was making progress, only to be hit with a wave of sadness or anger that set me back. But I learned something crucial along the way. Healing is a messy process. There's no perfect roadmap, no easy solution. There's no shortcut to emotional recovery, but the only way forward is to keep going. Even on the days when I felt like I couldn't take another step, I learned to keep moving forward, even if it was just one small step at a time. One of the first things I had to do was rebuild my trust in myself. For so long, I had trusted my husband, believed in him, and let him dictate the direction of our lives. But now I realized that I couldn't rely on him or anyone else to define my worth or my future. I had to take control of my own story, and that started with taking a hard look at who I was and who I wanted to be. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something I could do by just thinking positive. It took work. It meant looking deep into myself and facing the fears, doubts, and insecurities that had been hidden beneath the surface for so long. It meant acknowledging that I had been hurt, that I had been betrayed, but it also meant acknowledging that I had the power to heal. I wasn't going to let his lies define my future. One of the things I did to help rebuild myself was to lean on the people who truly cared about me. My family, my friends, they were there for me in ways I hadn't even imagined. Their support was invaluable. But what was even more powerful was seeking professional help. Therapy became a crucial part of my healing process. It wasn't just about dealing with the betrayal. It was about understanding myself better, learning how to rebuild my self-worth, and gaining the tools I needed to move forward. There were times when I felt overwhelmed by all the emotions. I was angry. I was sad. I felt betrayed. But with each session, with each conversation, I began to peel back the layers of hurt and uncover parts of myself that I had forgotten existed. I realized I wasn't broken. I was whole. I was just going through a tough time, and I needed to be gentle with myself during the process. One of the most difficult things to rebuild was my ability to trust. After all the deception, how could I ever trust anyone again? How could I trust myself to make good decisions after everything I had been through? It wasn't easy, and it took time. But I learned that trust isn't something that happens overnight. It's something that you build brick by brick. And most importantly, I had to learn to trust myself first. As I rebuilt my life, I began to rediscover the things that made me happy. I reconnected with old hobbies, spent time with my children, and focused on the things that brought me peace. I realized that I didn't need to rely on anyone else to feel fulfilled. I had my own strength, my own resilience, and I began to see the possibilities again. I wasn't stuck in the past, and I didn't have to carry the weight of the betrayal with me forever. I could choose to let it go and move forward, one day at a time. The process of rebuilding also meant setting new boundaries. I learned that I had to protect my energy and prioritize my well-being. I couldn't allow anyone, not even him, to come back into my life and disrupt the peace I had worked so hard to find. Setting boundaries became a vital part of my emotional recovery. It was a way for me to reclaim control over my life and my future. But the biggest lesson I learned in this journey of rebuilding was that life doesn't stop because of betrayal. I could have easily stayed stuck in the pain, stayed angry at the injustice of it all. But I realized that the real power came from moving forward. The real power came from taking my broken pieces, putting them back together, and creating something new, something stronger, something better. Rebuilding my life was a long and often painful process. But looking back now, I can see how far I've come. The woman I am today is stronger, more resilient, and more aware of my own worth than I ever was before. And though the past will always be a part of me, it doesn't define me. I am in control of my future now, and that's the most empowering feeling in the world. Looking back on everything I've been through, I can honestly say that the pain, as intense and raw as it was, taught me some of the most valuable lessons of my life. When you go through something like this, when your entire world is turned upside down by a shocking betrayal, it's easy to fall into despair. It's easy to let the heartbreak consume you, to allow the trust shattered by lies to destroy your sense of self-worth. But what I've learned through this journey is that pain can be a powerful catalyst for growth. It doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of something new. The first lesson I learned was about the importance of self-worth. For years, I had measured my value based on my marriage, based on my husband's love, based on the approval of others. I let his lies dictate how I saw myself. But once everything came crashing down, I realized that my worth had never been tied to him or anyone else. My worth is something that comes from within, from how I see myself, how I treat myself, and how I honor my own needs. After the betrayal, I had to remind myself every single day that I am enough. Even when I felt small, when I felt weak, when I felt like I couldn't go on, I reminded myself that I was worthy of love, respect, and happiness. And that lesson, painful as it was to learn, became the foundation of my healing process. I learned that no one can define my worth but me. Another lesson that hit me hard was about trust. After everything that had happened, how could I ever trust again? How could I ever open myself up to someone else, knowing how easily trust can be broken? But here's the thing I learned. Trust isn't about giving someone else all the power. It's about giving yourself the power to make decisions based on what feels right. Yes, trust was shattered, but I had to learn to trust myself again. I had to trust my own judgment, my own instincts, and my own ability to make choices that were in my best interest. Trust, I realized, isn't something you give blindly. It's earned, but it starts with you. And while I may have been betrayed by the person I loved, I also had to trust myself to move forward. I had to trust that I was strong enough to face whatever came next, whether it was healing from the hurt or opening myself up to new possibilities in the future. One of the most empowering lessons I learned was about resilience. Life can throw some pretty nasty curveballs, and sometimes it can feel like everything is out of control. But what I discovered through all the pain and heartbreak was my own inner strength. I found that resilience doesn't mean never feeling pain. It means having the strength to keep going, even when you feel like giving up. There were days when I thought I couldn't keep going. There were days when I didn't know how I'd make it through. But with every step forward, I realized that resilience is about doing the hard thing, the brave thing, even when you don't feel like it. It's about choosing to get back up every time you fall, even when you're exhausted, even when it feels like it would be easier to stay down. And while resilience was key to my recovery, another lesson I learned was about the importance of letting go. Letting go of anger. Letting go of blame, letting go of the need to have all the answers. For so long, I clung to my anger at my husband, to the questions that never got answered, to the lies that haunted me. But in holding on to all that bitterness, I was only hurting myself. Letting go wasn't about excusing his behavior. It was about freeing myself from the grip of resentment. It was about making the decision to move on, not for him, but for me. I had to learn that forgiveness isn't a gift for the person who wronged you. It's a gift you give yourself. When I let go of the anger and the hurt, I found peace. And that peace allowed me to rebuild my life. Perhaps the most important lesson I learned through all of this was about the power of choice. The betrayal may have been beyond my control, but how I chose to respond to it was completely up to me. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose how to move forward. I could choose to stay stuck in the pain, or I could choose to rise above it. I could choose to let the betrayal define me, or I could choose to let it be the fuel for my personal growth. And that's the most empowering lesson of all. You always have a choice. You can choose to let your pain break you, or you can choose to let it shape you into something stronger. You can choose to let your heartbreak define you, or you can choose to let it be a stepping stone on your journey to becoming the best version of yourself. The truth is, the road to healing isn't easy. There will be bumps along the way, moments when you feel like you've taken 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But if you can take these lessons and apply them to your life, you will emerge stronger, more resilient, and more aware of your own worth. And while the scars from betrayal may never completely disappear, they will become a part of your story, not the whole story. In the end, everything I went through, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the devastation, it wasn't for nothing. Sure, it felt like my life had been completely shattered, like I had no idea who I was anymore. But looking back, I see now that the struggle was a crucial part of my growth. It wasn't easy, and I wouldn't wish that kind of pain on anyone, but the lessons I learned, the strength I discovered, and the resilience I built, those are the things that matter. You see, life is never just about the good times. It's not just about the laughter, the celebrations, the moments where everything seems perfect. It's also about the tough times, the heartbreaks, the betrayals, the times when you feel like you can't go on. But here's the thing. It's in those moments that you find out what you're truly made of. It's in those painful, dark moments that you discover your inner strength. And if you can keep going, even when everything seems to be falling apart, you'll come out stronger on the other side. I know it might not feel like it right now, but I promise you, there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is hope. The pain you're feeling, it won't last forever. The betrayal you're suffering from, it doesn't define you. It's part of your story, but it's not the whole story. You have the power to heal, to rebuild, and to come out of this stronger than you were before. You have the power to choose what happens next. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all. No matter what happens to you, no matter how deep the wound, you can always choose how to respond. You can choose to let the pain define you, or you can choose to take control of your story. You can choose to stay stuck in the hurt, or you can choose to rise above it. It's your choice. It's your life. So, if you're going through something like this right now, I want you to know that you're not alone. I've been there, and I know how painful it can be. But I also know how strong you are. You can get through this. You can rebuild your life. And you can come out of this stronger and more resilient than ever before. Don't let the betrayal, the heartbreak, or the pain keep you from moving forward. You have the power to heal, to grow, and to create a new life for yourself. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Trust me, you are capable of so much more than you think. And one day, when you look back on this time, you'll realize that it wasn't the end of your story. It was just the beginning. So, now that you've heard my story, I want to leave you with this. Betrayal doesn't define you. Sure, it breaks you for a while, but the real question is, what will you do next? You have the power to rebuild, to find your strength, and to take control of your own life and future. If you've gone through something similar, or you're dealing with trust issues in a relationship, I want you to know that healing is possible. It's a journey, and it takes time, but it's worth it. You can't change what happened, but you can change how you move forward. So, what will you choose? Will you let the pain keep you stuck? Or will you choose to rise from it and create a life that's truly yours? If you found any part of this video helpful or inspiring, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join me on this journey of healing and growth. Let's continue to learn, grow, and find hope together.